The fluorescent lights of the 14th floor executive suite had a surgical quality that Julian never liked. They made the mahogany desks look sterile and the people sitting behind them look like mannequins. Julian sat in a minimalist leather chair, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He didn't need to check his watch. It was exactly 9:04 a.m. The board has been looking at the efficiency metrics, Julian, Arthur Vance said, leaning back. Arthur was the chief operating officer, a man who viewed the world through the narrow lens of a spreadsheet. Beside him sat Sarah from HR, her face a mask of practiced, neutral sympathy. The metrics, Julian repeated quietly. He thought of the 3 a.m. calls with logistics leads in Singapore and the way he'd talked a panicked steel vendor out of a contract breach last Tuesday. Which ones, specifically? Cost-to-output ratios. Logistical overhead. You've been over budget on relationship management expenses for 3 quarters, Arthur said, sliding a thin folder across the desk. We've brought in a consultancy firm, Logiflow. They've developed an automated procurement algorithm that does about 80% of what your department handles manually, at a fraction of the cost. The transition is effective immediately. Julian didn't open the folder. He knew what was in it. A severance package that was generous only because they wanted him to disappear without a whisper. He looked at Arthur, seeing the man's absolute confidence in his own data. Arthur didn't see a supply chain as a living, breathing web of favors, history, and handshakes. He saw it as a series of pipes that just needed more pressure. The Logiflow system is robust, Julian said, his voice devoid of bitterness, which seemed to unnerve Sarah slightly. But it doesn't know that the foreman at the Veracruz port won't release a shipment unless he gets a call from someone who remembers his daughter's name. It doesn't know that our primary silicon supplier is only holding our price point because I helped them navigate a strike 3 years ago. Arthur let out a short, dismissive puff of air. We're a multi-billion-dollar entity, Julian. We don't run on remembering names. We run on contracts. The vendors will follow the paper, or we'll find others who will. You've become an expensive bottleneck, an artisan in a factory world. The word bottleneck stung, but Julian kept his expression flat. He felt a strange sense of lightness, a sudden cessation of the constant, low-grade humming of responsibility that had occupied his brain for a decade. He looked around the office one last time. The clean surfaces, the lack of grit. These people had no idea how much mud he'd kept off their expensive carpets. I see, Julian said. He stood up and took a pen from his pocket, signing the final page of the termination agreement without reading the fine print. He knew the non-compete clauses by heart. He'd written the templates for them years ago. They were ironclad regarding him working for a rival, but they said nothing about him simply stopping. You're making a mistake, Arthur. Not because I'm indispensable, but because you think the machine is the business. The machine is just a tool. The people are the business. Well managed, Julian, Arthur said, already looking down at his tablet. Please leave your keycard with Sarah. Your personal effects will be couriered to your home by noon. Julian walked out of the suite, through the glass doors, and into the elevator. As the door slid shut, he pulled his personal phone from his pocket. A text message sat there from Hiroshi, the CEO of their largest semiconductor partner in Kyoto. Dinner next month when you are in Tokyo? My son wants to thank you for the recommendation. Julian deleted the draft response he'd started earlier that morning. Instead, he typed, change of plans, Hiroshi. I'm no longer with the firm. Best of luck with the new automated system. I suspect things are about to get very quiet. He hit send and watched the signal bars flicker as the elevator descended. By the time he reached the lobby, he wasn't just a former employee. He was the ghost haunting a house that was about to fall down. The first 48 hours of Julian's unemployment were remarkably quiet. He spent them in his garden, pruning the hedges with a precision that mirrored his old life. He ignored the vibrating hum of his phone on the patio table, knowing exactly what the notifications represented. Frantic emails from the Logiflow transition team, and confused check-in pings from middle managers who suddenly realized they didn't have the login credentials for the secondary freight manifests. By Wednesday, the silence was broken by a call he actually decided to take. It was Leo, a senior logistics coordinator who had been Julian's right hand for 6 years. Julian, it's a disaster. Leo's voice was strained, the background noise of the office sounding like a hornet's nest. Arthur had the IT guys lock your terminal and wipe the local drives. But he didn't realize your manual overrides folder wasn't synced to the cloud. We have 40 containers sitting in the port of Long Beach, and the customs brokers are refusing to process the expedited release forms. They're saying the signatures don't match the new digital tokens the Logiflow system generated. Julian leaned back in his Adirondack chair, squinting at the sun. That's because those brokers don't use the automated clearinghouse, Leo. They're old school. They work on a legacy trust agreement I signed personally in 2019. If the signature isn't mine or a verified deputy I've introduced in person, they hold the cargo for a full inspection. It's a security protocol we put in place to prevent corporate phishing. Arthur is screaming at them, Leo whispered. He told the head broker he'd have his license revoked. Julian, the broker, laughed at him. Then he hung up. Now, they've moved our shipments to the deep audit pile. We're losing $50,000 a day in demurrage fees, and that's just one port. Arthur has the contracts, Julian said calmly. Tell him to read section 14.2 regarding force majeure and administrative delays. He'll find that the brokers are perfectly within their rights. He doesn't want to read, Leo groaned. He wants the algorithm to fix it. But the algorithm just keeps resending the same digital token every 6 hours, which the brokers are now flagging as a spam attack. It's an infinite loop of failure. Julian hung up and felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. He wasn't doing anything to sabotage the company. He was simply no longer there to keep the friction of the real world from grinding the gears to a halt. The escalation moved from the ports to the manufacturing floor by Thursday afternoon. The just-in-time delivery system Arthur so adored relied on a delicate ballet of arrivals. Without the Long Beach containers, which held the specialized fasteners required for the chassis assembly, the main line in Ohio slowed to a crawl. Julian's doorbell rang at 4 p.m. Through the security camera, he saw a courier with a legal-sized envelope. It wasn't his personal effects. Those had arrived days ago. This was a letter of instruction from the firm's legal counsel, reminding him of his duty to cooperate during a transition period. He didn't open it. He knew the legal department was desperate. They were trying to find a way to compel his institutional memory, to treat his brain like a hard drive they still owned. But Julian had been careful. Every process he built was legal. Every contract was valid. What they lacked wasn't information. It was the weight of his presence. That evening, the news broke in the trade journals. Supply chain woes hit tech giant as new automation suite stalls. The stock took a 2% dip in after-hours trading. Julian poured himself a glass of scotch and sat in his darkened living room. His phone lit up again. This time, it was a text from the CEO of the steel vendor in Pennsylvania. Julian, some kid from Logiflow just sent me an automated termination of our current price lock because the market index dropped by half a cent. He didn't call. He didn't ask about our furnace issues. I'm selling our Q4 surplus to your competitor in Chicago tomorrow unless I hear a voice I trust. Give me a call. Julian deleted the text. He wasn't an artisan in a factory world. He was the only one who knew the factory was built on sand. The air in the boardroom of the 14th floor had turned sour. The smell of expensive coffee had been replaced by the scent of ozone from overworked printers and the stale sweat of men who hadn't slept in 36 hours. Arthur Vance stood at the head of the table, his tie loosened, staring at a dashboard of red icons. Why is Pennsylvania selling to the Chicago group? Arthur roared, his voice cracking. We have a right of first refusal. We had a right of first refusal, a junior counsel replied, his voice trembling. The Logiflow algorithm triggered an automatic price renegotiation clause when the index dipped. It sent a standardized notice of intent to adjust to their CEO. Section 8.4 of Julian's original contract with them had a personal good faith rider that nullified the exclusivity if the price was challenged without a 90-day consultation period. Since the algorithm sent the notice without the consultation, the contract is technically void. Arthur slammed his fist onto the table. Julian. It's always a ghost of Julian in the machine. Find a way to override it. We can't, the lawyer whispered. The vendor is refusing to take our calls. They said they only deal with principles, not scripts. While the office spiraled into a panic, Julian was 300 miles away, sitting in a quiet bistro in Philadelphia. Across from him sat Marcus Sterling, not the name of a competitor, but a man who owned the largest private logistics fleet on the eastern seaboard. They weren't discussing business. They were discussing vintage watches. Julian knew that in this world, the business happened in the margins of the conversation. I hear your old house is on fire, Julian, Sterling said, swirling a glass of heavy red wine. My drivers are telling me the yard in New Jersey is backed up 3 miles because no one can authorize the gate passes for the independent contractors. Apparently, the new system only recognizes Tier 1 carriers. The system likes clean data, Julian said with a thin smile. Independent contractors are messy. They use paper logs and handshakes. But they're the only ones with the capacity to handle the overflow when the Tier 1s are full. Arthur wanted to eliminate the inefficiency of paying local guys a premium. Well, the premium he's paying now isn't lost market share, Sterling chuckled. I've got 5,000 pallets of your, excuse me, their electronics sitting in my humidity-controlled warehouse. Your replacement, a very stressed young woman named Chloe, called me this morning. She tried to cite national commerce statutes to force me to prioritize their haulage. Julian raised an eyebrow. And how did that go? I told her I didn't like her tone, Sterling said flatly. And I reminded her that my contract was with the Office of the Operations Manager, a position I currently consider to be vacant. I told her I'd wait until someone with some sense called me back. Someone who knows that I don't move a single truck until I get my Christmas crate of single malt. Julian nodded. It was a petty detail, a ridiculous inefficiency in a digital age, but that single malt was a symbol of a 20-year alliance. By removing the artisan, Arthur had removed the glue. Back at the headquarters, the pressure had reached a breaking point. The Ohio assembly line officially halted at 2 p.m. on Friday. 4,000 workers were sent home on paid standby. The cost wasn't just $50,000 in port fees anymore. It was millions in lost production every 6 hours. The board of directors had finally woken up. Arthur's phone rang. It was the chairman. There were no pleasantries. Arthur, the ticker is down 8%. The tech blogs are saying we've had a systemic internal collapse. Fix it. I don't care about the algorithm. I don't care about the Logi flow savings. Get the supply chain moving, or I'll find a COO who can. Arthur looked at the darkened office, the empty chair where Julian used to sit, and the flickering red screen of the optimized system. He realized then that Julian hadn't sabotaged the company. He had simply taken the soul of the operation with him, leaving behind a very expensive, very fast car with no steering wheel. The silence of Julian's suburban home was punctured by the low, insistent rumble of a high-end engine idling in his driveway. It was 8 p.m. on a Sunday, the hour when the corporate world usually gathers its breath for the Monday morning assault. Julian watched from his darkened study as Arthur Vance stepped out of a Blacktown car, looking like a man who had been put through a professional-grade shredder. When the doorbell rang, Julian took his time. He finished the page of the book he was reading, set it down, and finally opened the door. Arthur looked haggard. His silk tie was gone, his collar was stained with coffee, and his eyes were bloodshot. We need to talk, Julian. Not as management and former staff. As men. The men who run on contracts and paper? Julian asked, leaning against the doorframe, making no move to invite him in. Or the artisans you replaced? Arthur ignored the jab, his desperation overriding his ego. The Ohio plant is dark. The Pennsylvania steel shipment was redirected to our primary competitor 3 hours ago. And I just got word that the Port of Long Beach has moved our entire electronics inventory to a long-term impound lot for administrative verification. The board is meeting at midnight. They're looking for a sacrificial lamb, Julian. And you've realized that the algorithm can't be fired or blamed in a way that satisfies the shareholders, Julian noted. So here you are, looking for the manual override. Tell me what it takes, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly plea. We'll triple the severance. We'll bring you back as a strategic consultant with a base salary higher than my own. Just call Hiroshi. Call the brokers. Tell Sterling to move the trucks. I'll even scrap the Logi flow implementation. We'll go back to the way things were. Julian finally stepped back, gesturing for Arthur to enter. The COO paced the living room like a caged animal. Julian sat on the edge of his sofa, calm and immovable. You don't understand the damage you've done, Arthur. You think this is like a light switch you can just flip back on. But you insulted these people. You replaced 20 years of rapport with a cold, automated notice of adjustment. You threatened the broker's licenses. You told Sterling he was an external variable to be minimized. I was doing my job. Arthur snapped, then immediately softened. I was trying to modernize. I didn't think. I didn't realize they were so loyal to you personally. They aren't loyal to me, Julian corrected. They are loyal to the relationship. They are loyal to the fact that when a storm hit the Gulf, I didn't send them an automated email about delivery penalties. I called them to ask if their families were safe. You broke the trust. You can't just buy that back with a consulting fee. Arthur stopped pacing and looked at Julian, a realization dawning on him. You're not coming back, are you? You're enjoying this. You're watching us burn. I'm not enjoying the fire, Arthur. I'm just appreciating the warmth, Julian said, his voice devoid of heat. You told me I was a bottleneck. A bottleneck is just another word for a filter. I filtered out the chaos so you could sit in your clean office and look at your clean numbers. Now, you're seeing the chaos in its pure form. The board will sue you, Arthur threatened, a final, weak flash of his old self. Tortious interference. You've been talking to the vendors. Check my phone records. I haven't placed a single call to a vendor since I left, Julian said, standing up. I've been answering my door and my personal texts, which is my right as a private citizen. If your suppliers decide to stop working with you because they don't like your new tone, that's a failure of your management, not my interference. Julian walked to the door and held it open. Go to your meeting, Arthur. Tell the board the truth, that you built a billion-dollar house and forgot to include the foundation. I'm going to sleep. I have a very busy day of doing absolutely nothing tomorrow. As the town car pulled away, Julian felt the final tether snap. He wasn't just out of the company, he was out of the cycle. But he knew the phone would ring one more time tonight. And it wouldn't be Arthur. The board of directors didn't wait for the midnight meeting to conclude before they made their move. By 1 a.m., the corporate website had been scrubbed of Arthur Vance's biography. By 2 a.m., Julian's private line rang. It wasn't Arthur, and it wasn't HR. It was Catherine Reed, the chairwoman of the board, the woman who had hired Arthur to trim the fat in the first place. Julian, she said, her voice steady and devoid of the frantic energy that had consumed the COO. I'm calling from a secure line. We've just terminated Arthur's contract for costs. The Logie Flow pilot has been suspended indefinitely. We are facing a 40% drop in Q4 fulfillment if we don't get the Pennsylvania steel and the Long Beach containers moving by dawn. Julian sat on his porch, watching the first gray light of Monday morning creep over the horizon. It's a difficult situation, Catherine. Transitions are always messy. Don't play the diplomat with me, she said, a hint of steel in her tone. We know exactly what happened. We underestimated the human capital required to maintain our infrastructure. We want to offer you the position of Executive Vice President of Global Operations. Full autonomy, a seat on the board, and a compensation package that reflects the load-bearing nature of your role. Julian watched a robin land on his lawn. A week ago, he would have jumped at the title. But the clarity of the last few days had changed the math. I'm not coming back as an employee, Catherine. I'm not interested in being someone's capital ever again. There was a long pause on the other end. Then what are you proposing? The company is hemorrhaging. I've formed a private consultancy, Julian said, though the paperwork was barely an hour old on his laptop. The Julian Group. We specialize in crisis logistics and relationship restoration. I will take your firm on as my sole client for a period of 6 months. My fee will be a flat retainer equal to my previous annual salary, paid up front, plus a percentage of the saved cost from the recovered contracts. And I want Chloe, the girl Arthur hired to replace me, assigned to my team. She has potential, but she needs to learn that a supply chain is made of people, not pixels. That's an aggressive pivot, Catherine said, though he could hear her relief. But we'll take it. We need those trucks moving, Julian. Now, I'll start with the Pennsylvania plant, Julian said. But first, send a courier to Marcus Sterling's office with a crate of 25-year-old Macallan. Tell him it's from the office of the principal. He'll know what it means. By 9 a.m., the gridlock began to break. Julian didn't go back to the 14th floor. He worked from his home office, his windows open to the spring air. He called Hiroshi in Kyoto, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. He called the head broker at Long Beach and spent 15 minutes talking about the man's recent fishing trip before even mentioning the containers. One by one, the red icons on the company's digital dashboard, the ones the algorithm couldn't touch, turned green. The invisible wall was back in place, but this time everyone could see it. Julian had proven that in a world obsessed with the speed of the machine, the person who holds the oil can is more important than the person who owns the engine. As the sun reached its zenith, Julian received a final notification. A wire transfer had cleared. The inefficient artisan had just become the most expensive asset on the balance sheet. He closed his laptop, walked out into his garden, and finally turned his phone to silent. The supply chain was moving, the crisis was averted, and for the first time in 10 years, Julian was exactly where he wanted to be, in control, but out of reach.